Howdy everybody, it's Emilio Castro, your friendly neighborhood space dolphin, not back at it again, but here for the first time to christen this brand new channel with its first right and proper video. So, recently Jair Bolsenaro became the president of Brazil. Let's see, I have to consult my script because I've had so many cuts, I might just read straight from it at this point. So, Jair Bolsenaro is a former army captain, and like Trump, he has promised a lot of change to the people, and he has promised to change the course of Brazilian politics, and I think so far he has. Very, very substantially as well. He has been commonly referred to as Brazilian Trump and far right, as many of the newly emergent conservative leaders across the world have. And honest to God, by Brazilian standards, by American standards, he's more center-right, but by Brazilian standards, he is most definitely far-right. Because Brazil has had a series of socialist regimes being held, I believe it was four consecutive elections won by the Brazilian Workers' Party prior to him. So he, like Trump, has interrupted a series of left-wing regimes. Let's see here. The people of Brazil hope he can combat corruption and violent crime, and honestly, thanks to his anti-corruption, anti-crime, and strong pro-gun, as well as strong pro-market agenda, if he's able to actually enact all of the policies he wants, odds are, yeah, he will. And I think so far he's done a lot of good things for the country. But I guess we'll get into that later on in my feckin' script. So, let's see here. He's known as a fan of Donald Trump and vice versa, which, that makes... It makes a lot of sense because there's a disturbing, not really disturbing, it's honestly more overwhelmingly impressive amount of similarities between him and Donald Trump. And I guess it's just part of a wider trend though. So, shouldn't be too surprising. So, like the Trump campaign, he's energized a strong conservative base and far-right supporters. Also, like the Trump campaign, he's interrupted a series of left-wing regimes. Talked about that a minute ago. 4 elections and whatnot. The Brazilian Workers' Party is a socialist video. Oh my god. The Brazilian Workers' Party is essentially the Socialist Party of Brazil. I might cover them in a future video. I found a bunch of Wikipedia articles, so I'm not really in the mood to script any more videos, but maybe I have to. We'll see. Additionally, he's the latest of several... Yeah, I've talked about that a minute ago. He's the latest of several far-right leaders coming into power. Quote-unquote far-right. They're not necessarily far-right, more center-right, but of course by European standards it doesn't take too much to be far-right because a lot of crazy stuff goes on in Europe, but we'll talk about that at a later date, hopefully. His vice president is a former general by the name of Hamilton Mourão. I'm not 100% on how to pronounce it, but essentially his vice president is really one of many military people who's appointed into his cabinet. And some people are concerned about that because, he has more former military in his cabinet than the actual military dictator of Brazil. And that is a very disturbing parallel, I'd understand, especially in the case of Brazil, a country that's actually at some point had a military dictatorship. But honestly, I think that might just because he has a lot of military connections, and in turn, he has a lot of people in the military who he knows and who he can trust. So, the circles you travel in and whatnot. So let's see. He's promised to combat the ideology of gender in schools and respect Judeo-Christian tradition. I'm not sure really how he's going to go about the second one. I mean, he mentioned God in his inaugural address, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with mentioning God in your inaugural address. That's your personal belief, and if that's the common belief in your country, it's a good way to win support, I will say. Now, combating the ideology of gender in schools is a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion, because I think that can go both ways. If you police it to a certain extent, it becomes excessive. But in all honesty, things like non-binary and all the wide variety of genders and the new genders being created, it is an absolute mess, and I believe that schools shouldn't teach it. I think that they should teach, the hard facts and, just let kids explore all the newly formed genders and whatnot on their own time. So, it sounds good, but not sure if it will be good. He says he wants to focus on preparing children for the job market, not political militancy. And to my knowledge, a lot of left-wing administered schools, not just in private but public education, and not just in Brazil or America or Europe, pretty much everywhere where there are schools, they do have a very disturbing focus on politics, which is very harmful. Because when you essentially teach people to think a certain thing, they become incredibly weak-minded. Big shocker here. If you're not exposed to many ideas, it doesn't take much exposure to a new idea for you to completely change your system of beliefs. I think at some point I heard or read or I heard something where it was basically farm boys, people who kids basically who've lived in an echo chamber of conservatism for their entire life were very, very heavily affected by Chinese communist propaganda whenever they were captured in the Vietnam War, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Because if you're not exposed to many ideas, or you're only exposed to one set of beliefs, then, well, you would have never had to strengthen your mind. You would have never had to think and to build up your mind and all that nonsense. So basically, even the slightest bit of exposure to propaganda might completely flip your belief system. Anyway, let's see. So preparing children for the job market would certainly be a good thing for Brazil. I'm not sure if they have a issue in finding employment, or if people just have an issue in getting employment. I don't know how exactly the Brazilian economy functions or how it's doing. But, it's a commendable effort, nonetheless. He said something to the effect of, "I call on congressmen to help me rescue Brazil from corruption, criminality, and ideological suppression." I'm not 100% on what he means by ideological suppression, but I assume that ties into the combating ideology of gender in schools. And that's a very fair effort, because Brazil has had a crime epidemic with 63,000 people killed last year, I think it was. So he's going to be a very good thing for Brazil, at least Brazil overall. And let's see. That's just my little rant on political corruption. So corruption in politics is a big reason why third world countries don't progress, because essentially the way corruption works is it feeds a poor establishment that makes little progress, mainly because it's profitable to maintain the status quo, while at the same time acting strongly against progress and normally assisting certain elements of of society, like say drug cartels and other criminal organizations that basically kill your country and hurt the everyday man, or worse yet, gets the everyday man to, out of sheer desperation, join a criminal organization, thus making the crime epidemic worse. So combating political corruption is most certainly going to be a vital part in improving Brazil. So let's see, what's next? He wants to free Brazil from, he said he wants to free Brazil from both socialism and political correctness, and honestly, that's a very commendable goal. I mean, there's certain elements of socialism that are necessary. I believe, in my opinion, though, it should be more of a temporary or unreliable institution. But anyways, my personal beliefs aside, combating socialism in Brazil and combating political correctness in Brazil is certainly a good thing, because frankly, both of those have gotten, in the past at least, they've gotten in the way of progress, and instead they've been used as a tool by the establishment to maintain power and to control the conversation. That was a little biased, I apologize. But anyways, it is a commendable initiative. So again, I guess we'll have to wait and see how exactly he goes about this, because if it doesn't really, depending on how this goes, it can turn into something good or something disturbingly close to fascism. Anyway, he's attained the nickname Myth, and at first I thought that this was some sort of word in Portuguese, but no, that's the translation. And so I looked into it a little bit, and I can't quite understand Portuguese. But basically, by myth, they mean myth. Like the sort of legendary status, the type of myth that Hercules would be. It's essentially the idea that he is a myth. He is a legend. he is going to be this huge historical figure, and everyone knows it. And really, he is, because pretty much every no, I'm not going to say that's too much of a generalization. I don't know too much about these peaceful revolutions occurring in democracies. But yeah, he has interrupted a long series of left-wing establishments, of left-wing regimes. He is going to be a major reformer just by virtue of being a Brazilian conservative. And, of course, the fact that his campaign was strongly aided by a surplus of memes is another grand callback to the likes of Donald, my boy Donnie T up in the White House nowadays. So let's see. Oh my God, I'm really happy I get to talk about this because I got a video. I got the video of his speech here. Credits to I don't know that. I don't know how to pronounce that, but Alma Brasileira Ine. Oh God, I'm dying. I'll leave a link to this in the description. This guy is an absolute legend. Here, make Brazil great again. This is a new right-wing president of Brazil, Bolsonaro. This guy is an absolute legend. Yes. Halfway through, not even halfway through, where was it? I gotta find it. I have to find it. Oh, because in the middle of his speech, this brilliant speech, I didn't understand a word of it, but this delivery alone almost brought me to tears, I swear to God. I gotta find it. Because at some point here, oh no, I won't be able to find it. Oh well. Rip me. Was this it? Basically, at some point, he pulls out a Brazilian flag and waves it. The crowd goes wild, and it is just an absolute beautiful sight. Here it is. There it is. That man right there, he's a living legend. I got a lot of respect for that. I got some bold move in Brazil. Alright, so where was I? Alright. Another quote, grand quote from him in my opinion. I love this one. I might use it myself. Our flag will never be red. Our flag will only be red if blood is needed to keep it in green and yellow. Staunch anti-communist. In the event of Latin American countries who've kind of dabbled a lot in the idea of communism and socialism, that is an absolutely beautiful thing to hear from the new president of Brazil. Alright, sorry. Gotta find my spot here. Yeah, this is consistent with a strong opposition towards socialism. And it just goes to show that Bolsonaro will go down in history as one of many great conservative reformers in this era. His inaugural address was under tight security. This is what you didn't see there. In fact, journalists had to arrive 7 hours early. And when they did, all like the food and stuff they brought for the wait because they're going to be there for like almost half a day. It was just confiscated. Oh, so, I guess that sums up his stance on the media. Oh, God. All right. Sorry, I'm enjoying this too much. Now, you got to understand the security measures because his sons, I believe, were very worried that radical elements and a few radicals might try something along the lines of an assassination. And in past, he was actually stabbed by a knife-wielding fellow. I'm not entirely certain of the circumstances by which he was. But from the sound of it, in Brazil, the only thing it takes to be stabbed in Brazil is to look like you're not completely broke. So, he was almost killed then, so it's understandable that he'd have such heavy security and such high requirements of journalists. And I believe in his speech, he also mentioned how this was one of the cheapest political campaigns in history. And that is incredibly admirable because, you may or may not have seen the subtitles when he said it. But basically, most of the crowd, I think except for the people who were members of the opposition party, got in for free. And I really respect that. Another similarity he has to Trump is he's been called sexist, racist, and homophobic. And honestly, I'm not sure about racist, but he's probably just a tad sexist and a tad homophobic on account of the fact that he's really very strong, probably very strong, whatever religion he is. Because he's from the looks of it, he seems quite religious. So I honestly, I highly doubt that will actually translate into policy, though. But I don't really think he's racist. I haven't heard anything racist except for maybe what he wants to do with the indigenous lands. That's questionable, but I'm not sure if that's racially motivated. Probably more economically motivated. But anyways, one thing both I and the international community are concerned with is that he wishes to reduce regulation of the Amazon rainforest. Now, honestly, that's going to be a very bad thing for the environment, and it's probably going to further endanger several species. But for Brazil, for the Brazilian economy, and probably the Brazilian people, that will be a great thing. Because that is Brazilian territory. They have, I suppose they do have the right to develop it and use it as they see fit. I hope, of course, that he will maintain certain reservations and certain national parks, as do many other countries in the world. But that might be a hope in vain. Anywho. So, where was I? He apparently doesn't care for social programs, and I have mixed feelings on social programs myself, but I suppose it can go either way. Apparently, he has reversed course from initially statist stances to more market-friendly reforms. I believe he's promised to reform. He promised to reform the pension system in Brazil. I'm not entirely sure how the pension system operates, and he's also wanted to privatize. He also is wanting to privatize several government-owned businesses, and I think that privatization is unilaterally a good thing. Only certain services, like utilities in some cases, and definitely things like a postal service, should be maintained by the government. Things vital to basic communication and standard functioning. Let's see here. He's promised to cover that, and he has a strong stance against violent crime. That might be partly because he was once almost killed by a knife-wielding maniac. Let's see here. One of his statements on this. Wait. I guess I'll just read it. Oh, yes. He's kind of, sort of talked about essentially shielding police from consequences for killing during operations. And under the circumstances of Brazil, that might just be a necessity because of how many criminal suits are being processed when you tie it into police suits. But he's also said something to the effect of wanting to establish essentially a non-criminal court specifically for the purpose of processing police officers. And that would definitely be a good thing, because the criminal court in Brazil, from the sounds of it, seems like it would probably be very, very overwhelmed. See, a lot of people are scared that, of course, this will mean that there will be a lot more police killings, because the police know that they will be, to some extent, shielded from the consequences of killing people, even if it is just during operations. Then, they might be a little bit less hesitant to kill people during operations, which is a very, very bad thing if that's how it works out. But I suppose we're going to have to wait and see how exactly he goes about this. Here it is. 7 out of his 22 cabinet members are former military, more than the actual military dictator of Brazil way back in the day. 1960s, I think, mid-60s to early 70s. His first day in office. Now, this is really impressive. I kind of wish Trump did something to this effect, but Trump seems to be more of a slow roller these days. I'm a little disappointed. But his first day in office, he's launched several measures to both crack down on crime and shrink the state, which is an admirable feat. But, of course, there are consequences to making radical changes right off the bat, which is, of course, his approval rating is actually now the lowest of any Brazilian president in the history of Brazil. So, it is, though, an admirable feat, of course. Brazilian real currency strengthened by 2.5%, I believe, and stocks rose 3.6%. As a result of Bolsonaro's promises. So, kind of like Trump, he's energized the economy just by the virtue of existing. He notably wants to cut taxes from 36% of Brazil's GDP to 20%, which cutting taxes is always a good thing for the economy. And from the looks of it, I think he also wants to cut spending, so that should even out. One of Bolsonaro's first motions was that indigenous land claims will be processed. I mentioned this. Brazilian land claim or indigenous land claims will now be processed by the agricultural ministry, and the way I assume that will work is essentially, the agricultural industry or the agricultural ministry is going to prioritize developing the land for agriculture, and is going to sort of relegate the remnants of the indigenous people to a certain small area, maybe like the reservation system here in America, which isn't a good thing, but, well, it is a good thing for the economy. The cruelty of capitalism. Yet another action which will be good for the economy, but bad for someone else. Obviously he's enraged environmentalists and liberals because of these moves, and I think rightfully so, because it's questionable. But, of course, every country needs to seek a balance between environmentalism and caring for indigenous people, and, of course, prioritizing the majority of people and the economy. So, hopefully he'll find it, but I guess we'll see how it plays out. And, let's see. Bolsonaro has taken office with the lowest approval. Yep. Told that. Like Trump. Oh, yeah, like Trump. Bolsonaro is in an uphill battle to enact his agendas. But, he seems like the type who will get quite a bit done. Because he already has. And I'm quite optimistic about the future of Brazil, as are apparently the investors. He unsuspectingly raised the minimum wage his first day in office. And yet another one of his many radical reforms. And, I can go both ways. I'm not really sure where the Brazilian economy stands. I'm not sure how difficult it is for small businesses to get in the game. But the monthly minimum wage he raised, because I guess that's what they do. In America, we set our minimum wage based on hourly pay. The lowest possible is $7, but in a lot of states and cities, it's been raised to $15. We've seen that it has a negative impact on small businesses of the likes of shops, but of course, the obvious happens when you raise the minimum wage, and the few employees that a shop keeps make more, they spend more in places like restaurants and other shops. So, hurt someone, help someone else, it'll probably even out, because with the rest of his policies, if he improves the economy enough, the difference will be unilaterally good, if that makes any sense. So let's see, is that everything? Oh, yeah. He's also willing to allow a U.S. military base in Brazil to combat Russian influence in Venezuela, which is admirable. Notably, something I just remembered and probably skipped over in my script here. He excluded the presidents of Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua and called them dictators. It should be noted that they are all left-wing, and though in contrast to that, he welcomed the left-wing president of Bolivia. So what that communicates to me is that Bolsonaro here is a reasonable guy. He cares about his people, and he's willing to make a compromise. Well, he's willing to make a compromise in regards to some things, which is a good thing, because in modern politics, especially in America, compromise has been viewed a lot as a dirty word, but in reality, the only way to get anything done normally is through compromise. So I look forward to see how his presidency plays out, and I'm very optimistic about the future of Brazil. Likewise, with the emergence of several conservative reformers across the world, I think the world's going to fare pretty well for the next few years. And I think we'll be all right. So I think that's everything, and adios.